Welcome. This is an Alt-Shift-X live stream. We're here to talk about the new Game of Thrones TV show. Live stream. Oh my god, there was feedback, but it's okay. We're back. This is a first premiere of a new show. What did you think? Tell me in the chat what you think. On this stream, we're going to be talking through the episode. We're going to be providing some analysis and some lore. We're going to compare the episode to the books, because this show is based on a series of books by George R. R. Martin. I'm going to respond to some of your super chats and donations. If you want to donate, the best way to do that is with the Streamlabs link in the description. But I'm going to start by performing most of the script that I've written about this episode. We got this episode, I got to see it in advance. So I've got a lot to say about this episode, and I've got a whole script to perform, so I'm going to do that. And it's going to be a fun time. So let's talk about this bloody show. What do you reckon? I've got this cool family tree up on the screen right now. I made this little family tree which shows how this show, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, connects to all of the other TV shows. This is no spoilers, by the way. We're not going to spoil future episodes. We're not going to spoil anything until the spoiler zone. There will be a spoiler zone towards the end of this stream, and I will warn you when we talk about spoilers. But aside from that part, we're not going to spoil future episodes of the show. But check out this cool-ass family tree. So this is the House of the Dragon situation. So, you know, like the Targaryens started 300 years ago with Aegon the Conqueror taking over Westeros. Then we had Aenys and Maegor and old Joe, Jaehaerys. And then the House of the Dragon was a cluster situation. And, you know, no spoilers what happens there. But after the Dance of the Dragons in House of the Dragon, we had Aegon the Unworthy. And then we had some delightful characters like Daemon Blackfyre and Bloodraven. And they were all part of this war called the Blackfyre Rebellion. The Blackfyre Rebellion was 13 years before now in A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. And these are the Targaryens who we're going to meet in this show, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. We're going to meet Prince Baelor and Prince Maekar and Prince Aerion. And, you know, Aerion happens to be the brother of Maester Aemon from Game of Thrones. And then, you know, shenanigans occur, no spoilers, but then a while later we have King Jaehaerys, then Mad King Aerys, and then Daenerys. So this is how it all connects. Some of the characters who we see in A Night of the Seven Kingdoms are like the great-grandparents of Daenerys and Jon Snow and all of them. So I'm going to talk through some of those connections, some of that book lore, and it's going to be a fun time, so thanks for joining me. So I'm just going to go through it like scene by scene is my plan. So first to introduce us, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. As you know, it's the new Game of Thrones spin-off show. This season 1, is based on a book by George R. R. Martin called The Hedge Knight. And so this first episode is also titled The Hedge Knight. I believe it's titled The Hedge Knight. HBO does this fun thing where they don't tell anyone what the title of the episode is until the last minute. So I think it's called The Hedge Knight. And hedge knights are humble traveling knights who work like mercenaries. They're like a sort of lower class knight who goes wherever they're needed. And they're called hedge knights because sometimes they literally sleep under hedges. And so Dunk was a squire to a hedge knight named Arlen, who is the fellow who died at the beginning of the episode. So this show has a very different focus to Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. It's not about the great lords and kings trying to save the world and win the throne. It's just about this guy Dunk who is hoping to get a better job and pay his rent and maybe sleep under a roof. So that's what this is about. We're going to be live streaming every Sunday at about 10:45 p.m. Eastern Time, by the way, right after the episode airs. And I should also say that my evil, rotten, wormy cousin, Alt-Shift-X, has actually beat me to it and already released a podcast about this episode. My nemesis, Alt-Shift-X, is doing a podcast series with Gladys where they talk about A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, episode by episode, and they have already released a 3-hour conversation about this episode on Nebula. So if you'd like to check that out, it's at nebula.tv/Alt-Shift-X or nebula.tv/Alt-Shift-X. It's a good way to support this channel. Anyway, so Dunk is a different kind of a hero. He's different to Daenerys or Tyrion or any of those upper class people who we have in the other shows. And in the show, there are no White Walkers, there are no dragons, there are no huge battles. We don't have a dozen different characters in different places. It's really just about this one guy in this one place going to a tournament. So in this first episode, we meet Dunk, and this episode's really about Dunk creating his identity as Sir Duncan the Tall. He comes up with that name, Sir Duncan the Tall, throughout the episode, and names are really important in these stories. We have like Arya having many different names in Game of Thrones. She's No One, she's Weasel, she's Blind Beth, she's Nim, she's all these different names, and names are very important here. So this is about Dunk inventing his name. And in this episode, Dunk meets Fossaways, he meets a Dondarrion, he dances with Lionel Baratheon, and Dunk also has graphic projectile diarrhea. So that is a really fun thing that straight away sets the tone as being very different in this show than in the other Game of Thrones shows. Dunk is shitting on our expectations. He's shitting on the dramatic moment because this show is about questioning and subverting and deconstructing the romantic fantasy image of a glorious heroic knight. Which is one of the preoccupations of all of the Game of Thrones stories, but I think this one in particular is about taking a very different perspective on the fantasy and the dream of heroism and trying to take a more grounded, realistic look at, okay, what does it really mean to be a hero? And yeah, this show, as I said, is set 90 years before Game of Thrones. There's a cute graphic on the screen there. It's set 80 years after House of the Dragon and 90 years before Game of Thrones. It's in between the other two shows. The current king is Daeron Targaryen II. Let me show you a cool little family tree. So King Daeron Targaryen is king. He's married to a Dornish princess called Miria Martell. The hand of the king and heir to the throne is Prince Baelor Breakspear Targaryen. Baelor has a brother, Maekar, and a son, Valar. Valar is second in line to the throne. And we're going to meet Aerion, and Aerion also happens to be the brother of Maester Aemon, who we're not going to see in this season, but that is a connection to modern-day Game of Thrones. And yeah, there was a kerfuffle 13 years ago called the Blackfire Rebellion, so that was when Daemon Blackfire, this fella here, tried to take the throne from King Daeron, and with the help of Prince Baelor and Prince Maekar and Brynden Rivers, who is Bloodraven, who is the magic tree guy who trains Bran in Game of Thrones Season 6, they managed to defeat the Blackfires. So that was 13 years ago, and now things are at peace. So we meet Dunk, and Dunk is played by Peter Claffey, who is an Irish actor. He used to be a rugby player. Peter Claffey appeared in Bad Sisters, which is a really good black comedy drama series. I really recommend Bad Sisters. So specifically season 1 of Bad Sisters. Season 2 of Bad Sisters is not so good. But Bad Sisters is funny because because Peter Claffey plays kind of the exact same character. Peter Claffey plays two different characters in Bad Sisters, and both of them are almost the same personality as Dunk. Because in both cases, Peter Claffey plays someone who is awkward and a bit thick and says the wrong thing sometimes, but is also like well-intentioned and, you know, has his heart in the right place. So Peter Claffey is very, very able to play that kind of role, and I think he does a good job here in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. It's also, I mean, we should note that Peter Claffey looks different to Dunk in the book a bit, because in the book, Dunk is only 16 or 17 years old, whereas Peter Claffey was 28 when they filmed this season. So Peter Claffey is older. In the book, he's only a boy. He's a, quote, shambling, shaggy, big-boned boy. And in the book, Dunk is almost 7 feet tall, or at least he's almost 7 feet tall in about a year and a half. We don't know his exact height, but he's closer to 7 feet than 6 feet, whereas Peter Claffey is only 6'6". He says he's about 6'6". So they look a little bit different, but I think Claffey captures the feeling and the personality of Dunk in the book. And George R. R. Martin agrees. The author of the book, George R. R. Martin was involved in the creation and the writing and the development of this TV show, and George Martin says that he loves this season. Let me see what y'all are saying in the chat. I'm going to respond to some of your chats and your donations as we go along, although I'm going to go through the script first and get to your questions a bit later. Thank you, Lanka, who says, with so many ass shots, I finally understand why the book kept saying that Dunk was thick as a castle wall. Thick in more than one sense of the word, sure. PK says, I've not paid attention to Game of Thrones since season 8. Is any of this good, in contrast to the first season of GOT? Is this show good? I mean, yeah, I do think this is good. I mean, I think that it's certainly the most fun Game of Thrones season that we've had in a long time. It's certainly the most faithful to the books of any season of any Game of Thrones show, I think. This is a very faithful adaptation. It adds some stuff, but most of the scenes are very, very close to what's in the book. So yeah, I think this season is really good. I mean, I'm not going to get too opinionated. You know, I try to be a professional, but if you want some more opinionated discussion of this show, you might consider watching Dunk Time with AltShiftX and Glidus at nebula.tv/AltShiftX. Shannon says, what are your future plans for Song of Ice and Fire videos? We're going to do a lot of Dune stuff this year. I mean, I expect we'll cover House of the Dragon Season 3 as well, but there's a bit of a backlog of big Dune videos that I want to finish before Dune Part 3 comes out, so that'll be a focus as well. Alright, back to the script. So, we meet Dunk, and I think that Peter Claffey's performance as Dunk is really faithful to what Dunk is about, even if he doesn't look exactly like him. And Dunk is burying his father figure, Arlen, because originally Dunk was an orphan on the streets of King's Landing. He was in Flea Bottom, which is the same place that Davos Seaworth and Gendry came from. And Dunk was rescued from that life of poverty by Sir Arlen. I mean, Dunk was rescued from a life of poverty to a life of slightly less intense poverty. It was still poverty, but he was rescued from the gutters by Arlen, and for about 10 years Dunk served as Arlen's squire. And, you know, Arlen was a hedge knight, and hedge knights have a bad reputation. Some of them become criminals and outlaws. But Arlen taught Dunk the values of a true knight, which means to be honorable, to be brave, to be loyal, to defend the weak and the innocent, to do the right thing, to do justice. That's what knighthood is about. Of course, George Martin's stories often explore how those ideals and those values sometimes clash with reality. And sometimes in the real world, there's corruption and there's complexity and there's ambiguity, and like dealing with those complexities and trying to be a hero in the face of those complexities is what these stories are all about. So Dunk says that Arlen never hit him except when he deserved it. And so we get this fast-paced series of flashbacks of the times when Dunk deserved to be hit. And so in this shot, we see that it looks like young Dunk, played by Bamba Todd. Young Dunk, it looks like he was mud wrestling someone. There's this person in the background in the mud, and it looks like maybe someone's mother is coming to comfort someone in the mud. So it looks to me as though young Dunk has like wrestled and, you know, maybe been a bit rough with this kid in the background. And so that's why Dunk feels he deserved to be hit by Arlen this time. And then in this other shot, it looks as though Dunk must have caused this fire. Dunk must have messed up and caused a fire. And I think it's really elegant how, you know, they show us young Dunk played by Bamba Todd in one flashback, then another shot of young Dunk played by Bamba Todd, and then another shot of Dunk played by Peter Claffey. And so these like three flashbacks are like a hyper condensed montage of Arlen and Dunk's 10 years together. It's like their whole time together, a whole decade, shown to us in the space of 3 seconds, which I think is a really fun and creative way to do things. And again, this is something that the original Game of Thrones show and the House of the Dragon show doesn't do, is these like fast comedic flashbacks. We've never seen this device before, and it's another way that this show really quickly establishes itself as being a different kind of show to Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. There is a fourth flashback where Dunk was blamed for stealing a pie. And in this case, Dunk was innocent. Dunk didn't deserve to be hit, because we see that this kid is the real pie thief. And this pie thief got away with it. I've got a theory, actually, about this pie thief. Because, this is like 90 years before Game of Thrones. So my hot theory is that what if that pie thief is in fact the great-grandfather of Hot Pie from Game of Thrones? Do you think there's a connection there? Grand Hot Pie theory. It could. The books don't say it's him, but they don't say it's not him. Hot Pie theory. The Grand Hot Pie conspiracy. That's what I reckon. So we get those little flashbacks, and it's a very different tone right in the first minute of this show. So Dunk loved Arlen. He was the closest thing he had to a parent, and Dunk served Arlen for about 10 years. And a few days ago, Arlen and Dunk were traveling to Ashford. Ashford is a town in the Reach. Do you want to see where it is on the map? I'll pull it up on the map. So this is Westeros, and down in the south, this region is called the Reach. It's like the verdant breadbasket of Westeros. It has a history and a tradition of chivalry and knighthood and tournaments. And so Highgarden is like the key castle in the Reach, ruled by the Tyrells. That's the family of like Marjorie and Loras and Mace and Olenna Tyrell. And just along the Mander, then the Cockleswent River, there's Cider Hall, which is the house of the Fossaways. We meet Stefan and Raymond Fossaway. That's where they live, Cider Hall. And then further down the river is Ashford. And so Ashford is a market town with a triangular castle, and it's the seat of House Ashford, who have a white and orange chevron as their heraldry. So the Ashfords are kind of nobodies. They are sworn to serve the Tyrells, who are in turn sworn to serve the Targaryens on the Iron Throne in King's Landing. And so Plummer mentions that Lord Ashford thinks himself of great import. So he's trying to like raise the profile of House Ashford by holding a grand tournament. It's an opportunity for houses to show off and trying to show their power and try and get opportunities and make connections and make alliances. So that's what's going on at this tournament. And so for Arlen and Dunk, a tournament is an opportunity to try and make some money. So they're coming to the tournament, and in the book it describes how how Arlen was singing on the way to Ashford. He was saying, "We're riding to Ashford to see the fair maid." And there was hope, and it was a good time, but very, very quickly things went bad, and there was rain, and then there was a chill, and so Arlen got sick, and Arlen died. And in the book, Dunk thinks about how, well, Arlen did live for 50 years, and, that's not bad in Westeros for a hedge knight, and so sadly he buries his father figure. In the book it says that the old man's body feels as light as a bag of leaves. And Dunk buries Arlen on the west side of a hill because Arlen loved to watch the sunset. It's very sad, it's very poignant, and I think that Peter Claffey performs Dunk's grief really nicely. I like how Dunk's first words in this show are, "I don't know the right words." Because Dunk is not smart, Dunk is not eloquent, Dunk is not articulate, he doesn't talk good. He's not fancy. He's a simple, honest, humble guy, and it tells you that straight up, which is really nice. So Dunk is now unemployed because Dunk was Arlen's squire, which means you look after the horses, you look after the armor, you do cleaning, you help at camp. And now that Arlen's dead, Dunk needs a new job. So Dunk discusses his employment opportunity. His employment options with his horses. So it's very important that we learn the horses' names here, guys. So the big brown horse, this is Thunder. Thunder is the war horse. Thunder is male. Thunder is fierce and spirited and is a veteran of dozens of fights. And Thunder's a reliable, strong war horse. The lighter brown horse, this is Chestnut. Chestnut is a sway-backed old stot and is kind of useless and is a bit too old to be of much value. But Dunk loves Chestnut anyway. George R. R. Martin can't decide what the sex of Chestnut is. In the first book, The Hedge Knight, Chestnut is described as a female, as a mare. but in the second Dunk and Egg book, Chestnut is described as a male. So I don't know, man. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what gender this horse is. The third horse, the white horse, Sweetfoot, is a palfrey, which is like a comfortable riding horse. Not for battle, but like for chill, comfortable riding. And so Sweetfoot is also a sweetie. Sweetfoot is a mare in the books, I believe. So these horses are like honestly like Dunk's best friends at this point. So that's who he talks to. One of the interesting challenges for this adaptation is that they've got to tell us what Dunk is thinking and feeling. And in the book, we can read and access Dunk's thoughts directly. But in the TV show, we can't. And so the TV show has to find creative ways for Dunk to tell us what he's feeling and thinking. And so one of the ways is they have Dunk talk to his horses a whole lot, which I think is really charming. So in the show, Dunk is thinking he could sell the horses and go and join the City Watch in King's Landing, or he could join the City Watch in Lannisport, which is the Lannister city. But then Dunk holds Arlen's sword, and the dramatic Game of Thrones music plays. And so we realize that Dunk is thinking, maybe I should be a knight. Maybe I should go and join the tournament at Ashford Meadow. And just when the dramatic music is playing, hard cut to Dunk pooping. Pooping like pretty near the grave of his newly dead father figure, which is wild. But yeah, we get projectile diarrhea in the first 5 minutes of this new TV show, which is, again, this show is it really wants us to know that this show is different. It is tonally different to every other Game of Thrones show. And I think that this will gross some people out. I think that this might ick some people. Wet splatting, says the subtitles. Wet splatting and relieving sighs. Those are some remarkable subtitles, no doubt. I really enjoy how you can actually see on Dunk's face how he's looking all, yeah, man, I'm going to be a knight. It's going to be so cool. And then Dunk sort of looks down. He sort of blinks and he goes, oh, uh-oh, something is happening in Dunk's bowels. You can really see it frame by frame as he realizes that he's about to have diarrhea next to his master's grave. So yeah, they really do that. But among all of the grossness and the ickiness and the pooping, we see this beautiful robin. We see this beautiful songbird. And that's one of the things about A Song of Ice and Fire. That's one of the things about the book, is that yes, Game of Thrones has a lot of violence and cruelty and darkness and ugliness, but George Martin is always highlighting the beauty and the hope among all of that evil. And I reject the idea. George R. R. Martin says that he rejects the idea that his books are nihilistic or that his books are cynical. He argues that his books are realistic. They see the evil in the world, but they celebrate heroism in the face of evil. They celebrate hope in the face of ugliness. They celebrate good among evil. And I think that that's what these opening scenes capture. I mean, I'm not sure, like, for real, like, they capture that in so many ways. Because the physical center of this scene is the tree. And a tree is a symbol of life. And so it's beneath this symbol of life that Arlen is buried. We get a tree and we get a grave. We get rain. We get dark clouds and rain. And then we get sunshine. We get the diarrhea. And then we get the beautiful songbird. It's all about the contrasts between fantasy and reality. On the official Game of Thrones podcast, George Martin recently said, it's about the conflict between the ideal and the realistic. And so I think this scene captures those like thematic undertones really well as characterizing Dunk, and as well as introducing some of those themes of knighthood versus realism. So yeah, I think the opening scene really captures the meaning and the personality of the story, and also sets the tone of this show as being very different to every other show. I should also note that this opening scene is the same as Shrek. I mean, remember the opening of the movie Shrek? Remember when it starts with Shrek reading through a storybook of a fairy tale, and Shrek is like, yes, once upon a time there was a princess, and only with true love's first kiss can the princess be awoken. And then Shrek says, like that'll ever happen. And then Shrek literally wipes his ass with the page of the fairy tale and then flushes. And then Shrek flushes and steps out of the outhouse. It literally is the start. Like this show is just Shrek, and the relationship between Shrek and Donkey is very similar to the relationship between Dunk and Egg. There also, of course, are dragons in both worlds. Onions, I mean, look, there's a whole like school of Shrekian analysis that you could do, like to analyze the Shrektitude of this TV show, the Shrekassequoi of this show. I mean, this is just a free video essay idea for y'all. I mean, you can have that one for free. I want to see a 1 hour thesis of how Shrek is the same as A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. I mean, it should be said that this story also happens to be nigh identical to the movie A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger. That's also basically the same story. And it should also be said, Shrek and A Knight's Tale both came out after this book, The Hedge Knight, came out. However, The Hedge Knight by George Martin came out after a movie called Ivanhoe. George Martin says that he wrote the book because he was inspired by the movie Ivanhoe, which is like a medieval story about jousting and restoring the rightful king. We actually did a conversation about Ivanhoe with Glidus. This is what a segue. I had a conversation with Glidus about the movie Ivanhoe, and you can watch that if you'd like on Nebula. You can sign up at nebula.tv/AltShiftX or nebula.tv/AltShiftX. Link in the description. But yeah, we do talk about the movie that inspired this book and this TV show if you're interested. And we also have 60 hours of exclusive AltShiftX and Glidus videos at nebula.tv/AltShiftX. So check it out. Sign up if you're interested. Anyway, so yeah, Shrek theory. Anyway, so we get the title card, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. So all the other Game of Thrones shows, they have like big, bombastic, grand opening themes. So like in Game of Thrones, we zoom around the map and there's the big astrolabe. We get the Ramin Djawadi, da-da-da-da-da-da. And in House of the Dragon, Season 1, it flies around that god-ugly family tree structure. And then Season 2 has the pretty tapestry. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms has none of that. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms doesn't have theme music. I mean, it has some cute whistling music that comes up more than once, but there's no like set theme song that plays every time. We just get this Knight of the Seven Kingdoms text, and it's in the Game of Thrones font, but it's a sort of a wonkier font. It looks a bit handwritten. It looks almost like a illuminated manuscript, maybe. But it's more intimate, it's more personal, it's more simple, it's more humble. And the showrunner Ira Parker talked about how they want that to reflect Dunk's personality and the whole feel of the show. So I think that even the title card reflects all of that. And so, this title, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, it sort of confirms that, yes, that is Dunk's intention. Dunk is deciding to be a knight of the Seven Kingdoms. And there is one small problem with that, which is that you can't just decide to be a knight. To be a knight, you have to be knighted in a ceremony by another knight. And later in this episode, Dunk says that Arlen knighted him before Arlen died, but we don't see that happen. And later Dunk says that, a songbird, a robin in the tree witnessed my knighting. But we don't see a robin witness a knighting. We see a robin witness diarrhea. The songbird sees Dunk pooping. The songbird does not see Dunk knighted. And also we see a flashback later on where young Dunk asks Arlen, "Are you going to knight me?" And Arlen just spits. So it seems like maybe Dunk is lying, that Dunk isn't a real knight, that Dunk wasn't knighted by Arlen. If Dunk was a knight, why would Dunk have considered selling the horses and joining the City Watch? It doesn't make sense. It seems as though Dunk decided to be a knight in that moment that we saw when the theme song played. He's lying. And that's really interesting. Because in most of the time, Dunk seems like a really honest person, a really straightforward person, a really moral, principled person. So it's surprising and out of character if Dunk is lying about being a knight. So that's an ongoing question that we should consider as the story goes on. So Dunk rides to go and join the tournament at Ashford. I really like this shot of this inn that we see, which looks exactly how it's described in the book. The book says, quote, "The warm yellow light spilling from its windows looked so inviting that he could not pass it by." This shot captures that feel, doesn't it? The warm light spilling from its windows. I really like the direction throughout this season. I think this episode was this one directed by Sarah Adina Smith? There's some really creative... this one was Owen Harris. Yeah, so this episode was directed by Owen Harris, who was also the director of the Black Mirror episode San Junipero, which is a lovely episode of Black Mirror, one of the fan favorites. But yeah, the other director of this season of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms is Sarah Adina Smith, and she does some really lovely cinematography and some really fun and creative camera work as well. So look forward to that. So Dunk goes up to this inn as he's riding towards Ashford, and he decides to stop for a meal, and he meets this bald boy, and Dunk wrongly assumes that this bald boy is the stable boy who works at this inn. And, we see that Egg looks really sad and kind of mopey. He's like, "Oh, I could look after your horses if I wanted to." And the reason why Egg is all sad and all mopey is that Egg wants to be at the Ashford tournament having fun, but instead he's stuck at this inn. And Dunk wrongly assumes that Egg is working as a stable boy and leaves the horses with him. George R. R. Martin loves cases of mistaken identity. So many characters have secret identities. Think about when Arya is pretending to be no one and literally wears the faces of all these different people. And sometimes Arya isn't recognized by people, even when she wants to be. There's this thing in the book how like Theon Greyjoy becomes Reek, and then Theon's own sister doesn't recognize Theon when they meet later. And there's also an earlier point where Theon doesn't recognize his sister Asha, who's called Yara in the Game of Thrones show. Point being is that there's lots of cases of mistaken identity, and this is one of them, with Dunk misunderstanding what Egg's situation is. In the book, Egg is naked when Dunk and Egg meet because Egg is bathing in a stream. But they decided to give Egg clothes. Egg is played by Dexter Sol Ansel, by the way, he was 8 or 9 when they filmed A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, the same age that Egg is in the book. So they've done good casting there, I think. So Dunk heads into the inn, and it's almost empty because everyone has gone to the tournament. And the innkeep drinks some of the wine before giving wine to Dunk, which is iconic. And the innkeep talks shit about, why does everyone care about knights? Knights are just the same as other men. A joust doesn't change the price of eggs. So again, that's the central theme here, which is about, yes, knights are glorious and dreamy and fantastical and noble, and yeah, who doesn't want to be a knight? But at the same time, it's all kind of made up and nonsense. And like, at the end of the day, you got to pay rent and buy eggs, So it's dreams versus reality, ideals versus reality. And it's kind of awkward when the innkeeper's like, tournaments are stupid. And then she realizes that Dunk is riding to join the tournament. And so he also is into the ideal and the dream of a knight. There is a drunk guy at the inn, and he's just like passed out on the table. In the book, he's passed out in a puddle of wine, like his face is in a puddle of wine. But I guess it would have been really annoying to have his face covered with wine in the show. So in the show, the drunk guy pulls a knife and he's like, "Stay away from me." And he says that he dreamed of Dunk, and then he wanders off. In the book, the drunk guy doesn't pull a knife, and in the book, he sort of sings to himself as he goes along, and in the book, he mumbles that he wants a whore, and he's just a mess. And if you want to know who this drunk guy is, we'll talk about it in the spoiler zone towards the end of the live stream. In the VOD, I'll put a timestamp to the spoiler zone in the video description, but for now, we are spoiler-free. So Dunk is really hungry, so he decides to have the lamb and the duck for dinner. In the book, there's a lavish description of Dunk's dinner. The duck is delicious. The duck is, quote, cooked with cherries and lemons, with a side of buttered peas and hot oat bread. Dunk has 4 tankards of thick nut brown ale, and it's all wonderful. Author George Martin is famous for his food descriptions. And in fact, my rotten wormy cousin Alt-Shift-X did 20 hours of live streams with Glidus discussing every food description in the Game of Thrones books. And that's free on YouTube or Nebula. But the show skips Dunk's meal, which I'm sure George Martin is furious about. I'm sure we'll get a big blog post on the Not a Blog saying, Ira Parker cut my food descriptions, rah, rah, rah. No, George Martin gets along very well with Ira Parker. There was a bit of drama lately, because George Martin has criticized Ryan Condal, the showrunner of House of the Dragon, and there was a recent interview published where George Martin said that his relationship with Ryan Condal is abysmal, whereas he says that his relationship with Ira Parker is really good. So, friendship with Ryan Condal ended. Ira Parker is my new best friend now. So there's a bit of real-life palace intrigue happening in the world of the Game of Thrones shows. But, I'm focusing on these stories. So the TV show skips Dunk's meal and Dunk goes to get his horse, because the books explain that Dunk could stay at this inn overnight, which would be really nice because he would get to sleep in a bed. But in the book, Dunk wants to save money, so he decides he'll just sleep out under the stars. He'll sleep outside. He'll make his own camp. And so for now, he decides to just keep riding. And when he goes to the stable, Dunk finds Egg riding his horse, Thunder. Why don't we pull up some imagery of the graphic novel? There was a graphic novel of The Hedge Knight, which was by Mike S. Miller. And I can show some of the shots from that. And here it is on screen. And so there's a lot of shots in this show that look just like the shots in the graphic novel and in the artwork. There's also an illustrated edition of the book by, who is it? Gary Gianni did the illustrations for the A Night of the Seven Kingdoms book. And yeah, there's also this Mike S. Miller graphic novel artwork, and a lot of it looks identical to what's in this TV show. Yeah, like look on screen. It just looks, it's the same. Like it's almost like the graphic novel is just the storyboard for this TV show. This really is a very, very faithful adaptation of the book. They have added some characters and they've added some scenes and they've expanded some characters. They've given some characters a bit more personality. But almost everything that's in the book is in the season. And a lot of the dialogue is like word for word the same. Like a lot of especially the scenes with Dunk and Egg, they are mostly like word for word the same as the book. So yeah, Dunk confronts Egg and says like, what are you doing on my horse? It's like if you park your convertible outside on the street and you come back and you find that some child has climbed into your convertible and is going vroom vroom. That's what Egg is doing on this horse right now. Egg is imagining being a knight, and it's very cute and it's very playful. But it's also annoying when you own the horse. And so Dunk tells Egg to get off, and Egg is cheeky. Egg is insolent. Egg talks back. Egg has a mouth on him, and Egg says that Dunk doesn't look like a knight and points out that Dunk is wearing a rope belt. So Dunk has inherited all of Sir Arlen's things. He's inherited Arlen's 3 horses and Arlen's sword and Arlen's lance and Arlen's saddlebags and Arlen's money. And unfortunately, Arlen was a much smaller man than Dunk. So Dunk doesn't fit into Arlen's armor. And Dunk also doesn't fit into Arlen's belt, his sword belt. So Dunk had to improvise and Dunk had to make his own belt out of rope. And so it does the job, but it makes him look like not a very legit knight. And so Egg talks shit. There is a little exchange that they don't include in the TV show that's in the book, where Dunk says, "Close your mouth, I want none of your insolence. The hauberk too, take it off. What did you think you were doing?" And then Egg says, "How can I tell you with my mouth closed?" Because Dunk said, "Close your mouth." And so Egg's like, "How can I answer you with my mouth closed?" It's just a really silly exchange. There's lots of these little bits of banter between Dunk and Egg. And so Egg also mentions that his mother is dead, and later Egg mentions that Egg is from King's Landing. So it seems like Egg is just like Dunk. Dunk thinks that Egg is an orphan from King's Landing, just like Dunk is. And we will learn more about Egg's background in the future, but I think that Dunk thinking that, he has all these things in common with Egg is part of what makes Dunk sympathetic with Egg and eventually decides to accept Egg as squire. Here in the stable, Egg asks Dunk to take him as squire because Egg really wants to go in the tournament. He wants to be part of the excitement, and Dunk refuses. And the reason why Dunk refuses in the book is that he's thinking that, yeah, Egg has a good life here at the inn. Dunk wrongly thinks that Egg is the innkeep's child, or was adopted by the innkeep. And Dunk thinks, yeah, like this kid will have a comfortable life and he'll have food if he stays here at the inn. It would not be a kindness to take Egg with me. And so it is a considerate, sympathetic choice that Dunk makes to not take Egg as squire. So Dunk rides to Ashford alone. Also, Dunk throws a penny to Egg, as a little tip, as a payment for his service for looking after the horses. It's fun because we get to see, or at least we get references to all the different kinds of coins in Westeros in this episode. I can pull that up, I believe. So the currency in Westeros is gold dragons, silver stags, and copper stars. And each of these coins gets referred to in this episode because the drunk guy puts down a gold dragon on the table, and Beanie, the woman later on, asks for a silver stag, and here on screen, Dunk gives Egg a copper star. So the gold coins have the Targaryen dragon on them, the silver coins have the Baratheon stag on them, and the copper coins have the star, the seven-pointed star of the Faith of the Seven religion. It is interesting that the silver coin has a stag on them. That kind of makes sense in the time of Game of Thrones because Robert Baratheon, the Baratheons are the kings at the time of Game of Thrones. But back here in the time when the Targaryens rule Westeros, it's like, why is the Baratheon stag on the silver? And it's never really explained in the books. I think that the reason is probably because Orys Baratheon is the rumored half-brother of Aegon the First Targaryen, Aegon the Conqueror. So maybe it was to honor Orys Baratheon that the Targaryens chose to put a Baratheon stag on the silver coin. But I think it's also maybe possible that it's like a mistake and a retcon, maybe. Because, this book, The Hedge Knight, was written pretty early on. George Martin published The Hedge Knight. Well, he was writing The Hedge Knight while he was writing the second Game of Thrones book, A Clash of Kings, in the 90s. This is a book from the 90s, and so some of the lore doesn't quite line up with the later lore. For instance, I mentioned the Blackfire Rebellion, which was a war that happened 13 years ago. When George Martin wrote The Hedge Knight, he hadn't written the idea of the Blackfire Rebellion yet. So the Blackfire Rebellion isn't mentioned in the Hedge Knight book. And so it's interesting to see if the Blackfire Rebellions are mentioned in this show, because they should be, given that they are kind of a current issue. So, it's interesting seeing how the show handles the lore, seeing as the lore has evolved since the 90s. So Dunk rides to Ashford in the Reach. Isn't this a lovely shot? Dunk rides to Ashford to go participate in the tournament. The showrunner Ira Parker compared this moment to a Western movie with a lone rider riding into a new town, which is such a Western movie trope. And we get this shot of Ashford Meadow. In the books, it talks about Ashford as being as colourful as a field of wildflowers. There are these pavilions. Pavilion is a term for a big fancy tent. And there are the pavilions of the noble knights are all colourful and beautiful. I'll put up on screen, you can see these are the tents of the knights as drawn by Mike S. Miller. And in the book, George really emphasizes the color and the beauty, the resplendence of these tents, because George loves the splendor and the color of the medieval pageantry, and that color is a contrast to the gritty realism that is at the thematic core of these stories. So I am a bit disappointed that in the book the tents are so colorful and so stunning and striking and beautiful, but here in the show the tents are not very colorful, as you can see. Most of them are brown and grey and drab. And I think there is a reason for it. I think that what they're going for is that Dunk is seeing more of the common people. He's seeing more of the workers, more of the merchants, more of the lower class people. And that is a contrast to the fancy noble knights. I think another possibility is that it's partly maybe a budgetary issue, because the showrunner Ira Parker says that this show has a smaller budget than the other Game of Thrones shows. So that might be part of it. But yeah, I am still a little bit disappointed, because I think that the color and the beauty of the imagery is an important contrast to the gritty realism. So Dunk comes into Ashford, and I really like the visuals here, where Dunk looks at these statues of knights, because, you know, again, this is so much about the image of a glorious, heroic knight. We get the tale of the legendary Serwyn of the Mirror Shield this episode. And so this statue is like a perfect visual image of, yeah, I want to be a triumphant, noble, glorious knight, yeah. And then Dunk also looks up at the tent of the noble House Dondarrion, and Dunk looks up at the castle of House Ashford up there on the hill. And so it's this very visual way of saying that Dunk is lower class, Dunk is at the bottom of the hierarchy, but Dunk aspires to move up in the world, to be a glorious noble knight. And Dunk aspires to, you know, move up more towards the nobility, more towards the Ashford, House Ashford, and to be a proper fancy lad. In the book, Dunk thinks about how he wishes for a seat above the salt. So at medieval tournaments, at medieval feasts, there's a big salt shaker, a big symbolic salt shaker in the middle of the table, and the people who are fancy and noble and highborn get to sit above the salt, up on the high table, where the important people are, and the people who are less important and lower class are below the salt. So this is a story about social mobility. This is a story about a lower class poor person trying to get a better position in life. And that's also a theme that George Martin talks about in his own life, because George Martin was born the son of a longshoreman, and he was stuck in Bayonne, New Jersey, gazing over at the lights of Manhattan over the water, just as Dunk is now looking out over the tents, over to the high Ashford on the hill. So it's about ambition, and it's about dreaming, and it's about desire. And Dunk hopes to move up in the world, though of course Dunk's ambitions are pretty modest. Dunk is not hoping to take a throne. Dunk is not hoping to be a lord. Dunk is only hoping, maybe if I ride well in this tournament, maybe someone will hire me to work at their castle, and then I'll get to sleep in a bed instead of under a tree. And maybe if I make a little money, I can afford some better food. So it's a very, modest tale of social mobility and ambition. Thanks for the donation from Disco Grass, who says, so the silver coins in Westeros are called stags. They've got the Baratheon on them. Maybe the in-universe reason for the stag on the silver coin is the white hart from House of the Dragon. Where we're told that white harts are an ancient symbol predating Targaryen rule, so maybe the Targaryens co-opted the white hart. I think that's a really interesting theory, Disco Grass. I think that that's interesting. I doubt that it's what George had in mind, because the Baratheons are such a prominent, the Baratheons are the most prominent association with the stag symbol, but you're right, the heart is a really cool symbol as well, and I'm sure that symbol is very much on George Martin's mind, because that's a very classic Arthurian sort of a symbol, isn't it? That's a really common symbol in medieval folklore and such. So yeah, maybe it's that general stag symbol that the Targaryens were alluding to when they put the stag on the coins. Yeah, it's a fun idea. All right, so Dunk is in Ashford, and we see some heraldry of some of the knights as Dunk is going through town. We see the Beesbury bees, and we see the Hornwood moose. The Hornwoods are a northern family. We see the Baratheon stag. We see the Dondarrion symbol. We also get to see some of the Tyrell's stuff. There's like a Tyrell cart with a servant working out the back of it. And the Tyrells are one of the most important, powerful families in Westeros, because the Tyrells rule the Reach. The Tyrells are the lords paramount of the Reach. They rule the whole region. And so Leo Longthorn is the current lord of House Tyrell, the current lord of Highgarden, and he also happens to be a famous jouster. He's very good at jousting. And I think it's really neat how we get to see Lord Tyrell's things. Here they are here on screen. We see the Tyrell Golden Rose, and we also see these like Tyrell fancy things. But we don't see the fancy Tyrell lord in his fancy things. We just see this servant working with Longthorn's things. And so I think it's really cool that we get to go like backstage on Westeros, you know, like we're getting to see not the fancy front of things, not the fancy outside appearance, not the facade of the noble fancy people. We're seeing backstage where the real work gets done. So many of these shots are like just the average working people who make this whole tournament possible. We see them literally hammering the lists together. And so all of this is only possible because of the average working people who set up the things for the lords. The Ashford sigil, as I said, is a white chevron on orange, and I like how they're hanging the Ashford banners everywhere, because they said that Lord Ashford thinks himself of great import, and this is really a branding exercise where everyone's trying to show off how cool and important and powerful their house is. So Dunk wants to join the tournament, so he goes and talks with Plummer. This scene is in the book. It's a little bit funnier here in the show. Plummer is a bit more of a kooky character in this episode than he is in the book. They add him clearing his throat and spitting and making gross sounds, which they do at many opportunities in this show. They like doing pooping and burps and all sorts of bodily functions. Which, you know, I think it's a matter of taste whether you find it funny. But that's certainly something they do to make the tone different to the other Game of Thrones shows. So Plummer is in charge of the lists of who joins this tournament. And Plummer is skeptical about whether Dunk is really a knight. And, you know, Dunk says, oh yeah, I was knighted by Sir Arlen. And Dunk presents Arlen's sword. And I think it's a really beautiful detail that there is a penny in the hilt of Arlen's sword. And the reason for that is that Arlen came from a village called Pennytree. And it's mentioned, well, in Game of Thrones Book 5, Jaime Lannister goes to Pennytree. And Jaime sees the penny tree, which is this old oak tree that people have hammered pennies into over the years. And Jaime thinks, it would be interesting to know why they nail pennies into this tree. And I could ask why they nail pennies into the tree, but I don't want to spoil the mystery. So I think that George is being cute there. I think the author, George Martin, is saying, I'm going to reveal one day why there are pennies in the tree, but I'm not going to reveal it yet. So I think it's fun how they're alluding to that mystery again here in the show. Oh, and by the way, shout out to Schubert Reads for moderating the live stream. I appreciate it, Schubert. And if you'd like to check out Schubert's videos, you can. Check out his channel. He does like audiobooks. Yeah, so I think it's cute how they put a penny into Arlen's sword. Even though Plummer doesn't really care. But Plummer does this great show of saying, oh, you better not be lying about not being a knight because we do this terrible torture called the Ashford Chair if you lie. But he's mostly just messing around with Dunk. Like, he's just a bureaucrat. He's just doing his job. He doesn't really care all that much. People are constantly taking the piss on Dunk. Although for Dunk, all of this is very high stakes. Like, Plummer and Lionel don't care very much about Dunk's predicament, but to Dunk, it's everything. This is his career on the line. So you get a very, like, visceral and I think very relatable sense of Dunk's at the bottom of the social hierarchy, and all of these bureaucrats can have a huge impact on his life. I mean, it's like if you're at the DMV, or you're trying to get Centrelink, if you're trying to get welfare, if you're trying to get insurance, we often are at the mercy of bureaucrats who can have like a huge financial impact on our life. And so for us, it can mean everything, but to the bureaucrat behind the desk, they don't give a shit. And so I think that they're giving us that feeling of inequality and of class in a really powerful way. The book is largely, like, it's often about class, and it's about what defines us as being upper class, lower class, more powerful, less powerful, rich or poor. Because as Plummer points out, it's sometimes about how you dress. Plummer says, well, you're dressed like a farmer, so why should I let you join the tournament? You stink. You don't talk proper. What kind of name is Dunk? Because words and language and clothes and appearance, all of that heraldry, I mean, that's what all the heraldry and the tents and the pavilions are about. It's all about ways of displaying class and displaying wealth, which determines your place in this world. And names, of course. Are you a lord? Are you a sir? Do you have a surname? Or are you just called Dunk? All of those trappings and appearances are what construct our place in the world. So if it is that Dunk is lying about being a knight, he is trying to sneak his way up the social hierarchy. He's trying to achieve some social mobility by using the magic of words. Because it turns out that words and names, they're fucking made up, but they determine our place in the world and our power and our wealth. So that's what's going on here. So Dunk says, yeah, Arlen knighted me while a robin watched, but all we saw was a robin watching Dunk poop. So maybe that's a lie. And we get a flashback where young Dunk asks Arlen, are you going to knight me? And then Arlen just spits. So it seems like maybe Arlen didn't intend to knight young Dunk. So it really does seem like Dunk might be lying, which is, a very serious crime in this world, to lie about sacred oaths. And again, it's very interesting that Dunk, who seems like usually an honest, straightforward, simple person, it's very interesting for such an honest man to lie about something so important. There's lots of goofy comedy in here. There's some very goofy jokes. Like, Dunk says that his name is Dunk, and at the same time that Dunk says his name is Dunk, we see Plummer literally dunking some bread into some sauce here. So they're just doing a little Dunk pun. Like, no joke is too small or too stupid for them to not do in this show. There's lots of tiny, silly jokes in this show, and that's one of them. So Plummer says that, well, Lord Ashford thinks he's real important, he thinks he's real fancy, and so I'm not meant to let random lower-class hedge knights into this tournament. We're only meant to have fancy, classy knights at my fancy, classy tournament. And so Dunk's like, yeah, that's not me. And so Dunk basically accepts defeat and starts walking away, but then Plummer sees Arlen's shield. So Sir Arlen's heraldry was a winged chalice, it's a winged chalice. And Arlen in the book said that the cup was, quote, full of faith and fellowship and good things to drink. Which is so sweet. Arlen was such a sweet old man. And when Plummer sees this heraldry as Dunk is walking away, Plummer takes pity on Dunk. Like maybe the sight of that battered old shield. I mean, it says so much, right? Some nice old man had this shield for a lot of years, and it's a nice symbol. And so maybe that's why Plummer decides to go, okay, I'll give the kid a chance. And so Plummer says you can join the tournament if you find a knight to vouch for you. If another knight says, okay, Dunk, he is a trustworthy guy, and Sir Arlen was a knight who did exist, so we can probably trust that Dunk is truly a knight. Plummer says if you find a knight to vouch, then you can join the tournament. And so Dunk says, I'll go talk to Manfred Dondarrion. Because a few years ago, Arlen and Dunk worked with the Dondarrions and served with the Dondarrions in a war against the Vulture King in Dawn. So hopefully Manfred will remember Arlen and Dunk and will vouch for Dunk. But Plummer warns Dunk that the rules of this tournament are that if you lose a joust, you lose your horse and your armor and your weapons. The person who defeats you in the joust gets your horse and your armor and your weapons. And so you have to buy your stuff back from the person who defeated you, which means that if you win a joust, you get money, and if you lose a joust, you lose money. And Dunk has no money. So if Dunk loses his first joust, he can't buy his horse and his armor and his weapons back. And if Dunk doesn't have a horse and armor and weapons, he can't be a knight. So he's risking everything, his whole career, his whole financial future. He's gambling on this first joust. He needs to at least win the first joust or he's screwed. So Dunk goes to find Manfred Dondarrion. There's the Beesbury sigil over there. We know Lyman Beesbury from House of the Dragon Season 1. There is the Hornwood sigil, which is a northern house. R.I.P. Danella Hornwood in the Game of Thrones books. We also see the Hornwoods turn up to the Battle of the Bastards in Game of Thrones Season 6. And there's the Baratheon stag. There is a little minor controversy about the crown on the Baratheon sigil, because in Game of Thrones Season 1, Bran says that the Baratheon stag only got a crown after Robert Baratheon took over and defeated the Targaryens. But in the books, the Baratheons always had a crown on the sigil because it represents the crown of the Durandan Storm Kings. So technically, this crown is canon and is correct according to the books, but this does contradict what Bran said in Game of Thrones Season 1. So, maybe Bran was wrong because he's a 9-year-old boy. Dunk talks to his horse Sweetfoot and tells Sweetfoot to look out for the other two horses, which is extremely adorable. We see this woman Daisy enjoying some chicken or some kind of drumstick. Fantastic. And we later see Daisy naked, dressed as a corpse in the tent with Red and Beanie. So Red and Beanie are these two characters, these two women who are sex workers who have been having sex with Manfred Dondarrion. Red and Beanie and Daisy are not in the book. Their names are not mentioned in this episode, but their names do appear in the credits, which is how we know that their names are Red and Beanie and Daisy. And so this is the first scene that is invented for the show. These characters aren't in the book. This scene is invented whole cloth for the show. And it's just these women chilling and drinking and making fun of Dunk. Dunk wants to see where Manfred Dondarrion is, and they say that Manfred's asleep, and they talk about how Manfred enjoys having sex with other people's wives. So it tells us that even though Manfred is a fancy, noble knight, he's not a good guy. He has sex with other people's wives. And so one of the great ironies of this story is that Dunk might not be a real knight. He might be lying about being a knight, but Dunk is moral and honorable and good. Whereas some of the other knights who are technically true, real knights, they do not follow the values and the morality of a knight. They're not honorable, they're not brave, they're not just. So that's one of the ongoing themes. There is a bit in the book that mentions that Dunk notices a pretty red-haired whore in the book, and I think that pretty red-haired whore might be what inspired these characters Red and Beanie and Daisy and Leah in this episode. George sure does have a thing for redheads. Beanie says that she'll wake Manfred Dondarrion if Dunk gives her a stag, which is the silver coin, but Dunk doesn't have a stag, and so they make fun of Dunk for being poor and penniless. They also call Dunk it. They don't call him him. They call him it, which is like so mean. That's so mean to call someone it. And Dunk is just completely flustered, and he's lost for words. I mean, the first line in this show is, "I don't know the right words." Because in the book, Dunk thinks that he's no good with words, and he's worse with women. In the book, Dunk feels nervous around women. In the book, Dunk is just a teenager. He's like 16 or 17 years old, and he's a virgin. He's still finding his confidence with people. I think in the TV show, it doesn't work quite as well because Dunk is played by 27-year-old Peter Claffey. But in the book, Dunk is just a teenager, and so that's why Dunk is so awkward and nervous and flustered. So yeah, he gets sort of like lightly bullied by Red and Beanie, and he talks to his horses, and Dunk tells Sweetfoot about how Sir Arlen used to say that a hedge knight is the truest kind of knight, Because even though hedge knights are poor and penniless and low class and disrespected and occasionally criminals, hedge knights are unique in that they choose who they serve. Like, most knights are sworn to obey one particular lord or one particular house. A lot of knights serve one master for their whole life. But hedge knights, they travel from place to place and they take temporary service with all different people. And so hedge knights can choose who they want to serve. They can join a war that they care about and that they believe in. And so hedge knights can follow their heart. They can follow their moral values. They can choose to fight for justice and to protect the innocent. Whereas, as Jaime Lannister complains in Game of Thrones, if you're sworn to obey one king and the king orders you to do something bad, you have to obey and you can't get out of it. So in a way, hedge knights have more potential to be moral and good. But not all of them do. So some hedge knights go outlaw and go criminal. So I think part of the point of Red and Beanie, who aren't in the book, is that Dunk is like them. I mean, in the later scene, Red and Beanie say that, being a knight is like being a sex worker, because knights and sex workers both put their body at risk for the sake of others. Their service is to give their body in service of someone else. And so it's a parallel showing how both Dunk and these women are at real low on the social hierarchy, and all they have to give is their bodies, and that's what they do. And I think part of that is it's about, like, de-glamorizing knighthood. Like, people think that knighthood is glorious and wonderful and honorable and fantastic, whereas sex work and prostitution is looked down upon as something shameful and something morally bad. And I think that these characters highlight that it's interesting that knighthood is considered great and sex work is considered bad, even though they're kind of similar in the sense of selling your body in both cases. So I think that, like, interesting thought is part of what these characters are about. And again, it's that clash between, Dunk wants to be a fancy, heroic, chivalrous knight, but he's also got to pay his rent in the same way that these women do. These are all just working people, so that's what's going on here. So then Dunk meets some apples. The people of House Fossaway come from Cider Hall, and their heraldry is a red apple, and so they make lots of apple puns. The senior branch of the apple tree, knock the seeds out of him. A rotten wormy apple, an unripe apple. It's all apples with these guys. So this fella is Sir Stephen Fossaway, and he's a dick. And the younger fella is Raymond Fossaway, who is Stephen's cousin and squire. And Stephen is mean and likes to beat up other knights. He tries to injure other knights in training so that he has an advantage in the tournament. So Stephen is a dishonorable, cruel arsehole knight, a bit like Manfred, in contrast to the ideal of the noble knight. Dunk makes a weird comment saying, "This sword is mine by right. It is really, truly my sword, promise," which is like a weird thing to say. And so I think that Dunk is being defensive. He's feeling like an imposter. And I think he feels guilty if it is that he's lying about being a knight. And so while Stefan is kind of aggressive and tells Dunk to fight him in training, Raymond is more friendly and is more chill. Then Dunk goes and bathes in a river. In the book, Arlen made Dunk have a bath every month, and Dunk thought that was far too often to have a bath. And Dunk makes camp by under a tree, because Dunk doesn't have a tent. And so that's another nice little symbol of his humility. He doesn't have a fancy pavilion, so he sleeps under an elm. In the book, it talks about how Dunk, he could camp among the other knights on Ashford Meadow. He could just sleep under a tree near all of the other fancy tents, but he thinks that people will make fun of him and look down on him and scorn him for being poor, for being low class, and for trying to be among them. So Dunk decides to camp in a secluded spot away from everyone else. So it's another little thing about, the distance and the separation created by class. So we get a scene with Red and Beanie and another woman named Daisy. I've got to not show any nudity on YouTube. And so Daisy is dressed up as a corpse, which is interesting. She's got a funeral shroud. She's got stones painted with eyes over her eyes. And this is a death rite that we first saw in Game of Thrones Season 1, Episode 1. I can pull up an image of John Arryn. Oh boy, we're pretty good at this. There's John Arryn. You can see they've even got canopic jars, or what looks like canopic jars, see on screen? It looks like they take out the dead's organs and put them in jars in Westeros, which is a really cool and fun and creative thing. And yeah, they also put the stones on the eyes, is another thing that they do. And this death rite was invented for the show. The books don't mention putting stones on your eyes, and they don't mention canopic jars. But they invented that for the show, and I think that's cool, way back in 2011. And they continue that thing here in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms by putting the eyes onto Daisy here. So isn't that fun? So it seems as though the reason why Daisy is dressed up as a corpse is because Manfred or someone wants to have sex with Daisy with like a role play situation. They want to role play having sex with a dead person, which is pretty weird. We have seen before, like in Game of Thrones Season 5, Episode 3, we see the High Septon having sex with some sex workers who are dressed up as the god, the Faith of the Seven. So that's a bit of kinky, blasphemous roleplay in Game of Thrones. There are also several mentions of people having sex with dead people, like in Game of Thrones, Varys mentions that there's a lord who has sex with fresh cadavers. In the books, the legendary Night's King has sex with a corpse queen. In George Martin's sci-fi book Meat House Man, a man has sex with a corpse in a brothel. It's a bit of a recurring theme. George Martin keeps on writing about having sex with corpses. Why? I don't know. I don't think I want to know why George Martin keeps writing about having sex with corpses, but he sure does. And yeah, as I said, Red says that being a knight is like being a sex worker because knights and whores put their bodies at risk for other people's entertainment. And she warns Dunk that you only get one body, so you should be careful how you use it. So, combined with Daisy dressed as a corpse, this scene is about facing death. Being a knight isn't just about swinging a sword and looking cool. Knighthood is dangerous. People die at tournaments all the time. In Game of Thrones Season 1, we saw Hugh of the Vale die in a joust. And as Plummer pointed out, tourneys are especially dangerous for unskilled, untrained knights. And Dunk is not very skilled and is not very trained, so this is dangerous for him. I feel like Red and Beanie and Daisy, these three women, these three wise women, these three cackling women, they're a bit like the three witches in Macbeth, or like the three fates of folklore. They're like the maiden, the mother, the crone. Because they're these three women who warn Dunk of danger, and they also confront Dunk with the possibility of death. So I feel like they play an almost mythic role here, advising the hero before his dangers that he faces. And again, this scene is made up for the show. Red, Beanie, and Daisy aren't in the book. So then Dunk goes and sees a puppet show. It's a bit of a festival vibe at the camps before the tournament. And we see this character, Tanzel Too Tall, narrating this story. And the story is of Serwyn of the Mirror Shield. You can see his reflective shield here. So Serwyn was a mythical folk hero character who may or may not have ever existed. And Serwyn wanted to kill a dragon named Urax, so Serwyn polished his shield until his shield was reflective, like a mirror, so that Serwyn could approach the dragon, and the dragon would only see its own reflection. The dragon didn't attack until Serwyn was close enough to kill the dragon. And so the way that Tanzel talks about Serwyn, she describes him as a boy from nothing risking it all. She calls Serwyn brave and ambitious and stupid and humble. And that description also fits Dunk. Dunk is also a boy from nothing risking all. He's also brave and ambitious and stupid and humble. So I think this invites the question, will Dunk be a great hero like Serwyn? Or, is reality messier than fairy tales? Tanzel also says that Serwyn is disguised and that Serwyn is concealing a truth, just like how Dunk might be lying about being a knight. So that whole speech and stuff is not in the book, not like that, and so it's fun how they use that to sort of hint at and to sort of characterize Dunk. And it's also cute seeing Dunk instantly get a crush on Tanzel. Tanzel is a lot like Dunk in that Tanzel is also young and she's very tall and she seems nervous performing, but she's brave and she gets through it. And I think it characterizes Tanzel with a very similar vibe to Dunk's personality very quickly and effectively, so I think that's cool. Raymond Fossaway comes up and he calls Dunk half man, meaning that Dunk is so tall that he must be half giant. And this is a callback to Game of Thrones, because Tyrion is called half-man in Game of Thrones for the opposite reason, because Tyrion is short. And Raymond takes Dunk to where the party is. He takes him to Lionel Baratheon's tent. So the Baratheon sigil is a stag, so Lionel's tent is decorated with antlers, lots and lots of antlers. It's cool. It reminds me of, in the books, Mance Rayder has a really cool tent, which is also decorated with antlers. I was always disappointed that in the books, Mance Rayder, he's fun, he sings, he's got friends who hang out, and that's a vibe that is not captured in the TV show. In the TV show, Mance Rayder and Tormund are very threatening and unwelcoming and unpleasant, whereas in the book, Mance is inviting and fun and cool, and you would want to hang out with him. And so that's something that we didn't get in the Game of Thrones show, but here in the A Night of the Seven Kingdoms show, I think Lionel has that fun energy that Mance was really lacking in the TV show. So Lionel has a great party, and he talks incoherently about jousting and about the history of jousting, and he says that jousting is so much fun that it must have been invented by the gods or something. Lionel doesn't quite conclude what he's rambling about. I thought that maybe he was saying that it could not have been devised by man, so maybe he was saying it must have been devised by woman, but I think that the gods are what he means, I think. In the books, the knighthood came from the Andals, who were a people who came to Westeros from the east thousands of years ago. And it's said that the first knights and the first tournaments in Westeros happened in the Reach. And that's where Ashford is. We are in the Reach right now. And to this day, the Reach is the home of knighthood, of chivalry, and of tournaments. So being in the Reach, jousting in the Reach, it's like playing football in England. It's like playing cricket in England. This is the home of the sport. And so everyone's real excited to be here jousting in the Reach. Lionel Baratheon is from House Baratheon, and he is described in the books as a swaggering giant. He's said to be one of the greatest fighters in Westeros. He's almost as tall as Dunk, who is almost 7 feet tall. Daniel Ings, the actor, is not quite 7 feet tall, and the show acknowledges that when Dunk says, "I thought he'd be bigger." I also think that Lionel should probably have blacker hair. They said in Game of Thrones Season 1, Lionel Baratheon, black of hair. But, Daniel Ings' performance certainly makes up for it. The author George R. R. Martin said that Daniel Ings steals the show, and he's fantastic, and he's hilarious. And I agree. Lionel wears this big, ridiculous headpiece of antlers, and this headpiece looks a little bit like a crown, doesn't it? Which is probably a bit treasonous. You shouldn't be wearing a crown if you're not from the royal family. The Targaryens are the kings right now, and yet here Lionel is wearing a crown. So I think that, it's a little cheeky, it's a little bit rebellious. And of course, some 70 years from now, Lionel's descendant, Robert Baratheon, rebels against the Targaryens, takes the throne, becomes king. So I think that that's a little bit of foreshadowing, perhaps, Lionel wearing a crown-like thing. Lionel sees Dunk from across the bar and really digs his vibe, and so they chat, and Lionel makes all these weird threats and comments to Dunk, sort of idly threatens to burn him like a heretic. and such. And it's all very sort of weird. He's just kind of trying to make fun of Dunk. But Dunk is impossible to bully because Dunk is just so honest and guileless and gormless, and Lionel is like, why are you here? And Dunk is like, oh, supper. And it's just like, yeah, no, true, like right on. Like Dunk is just so honest and thick and naive that you just can't bully him, and it's very charming, and Lionel is charmed by that. I think Lionel is flirting with Dunk. Lionel compares Dunk to a maiden, and Lionel talks about gay fun. And Dunk doesn't seem to pick up on the sexual tension at all. And there is a similar bit in a book where a man hits on Dunk and Dunk doesn't notice. So it all feels very authentic to the book to me. I mean, this Lionel stuff is not in the book. Lionel Baratheon is in the book, but these particular scenes with Lionel aren't in the book. They're expanding on his character, and I think what they do is obviously an enormous amount of fun. I think the other thing that's going on here is that all these knights, they're here the day before the tournament, and they're all sussing out their opponents. They're all sizing each other up, and they're thinking, can I defeat that guy? Can I defeat that guy? What's my opposition? And I think Stefan was doing that in the training field and trying to beat people up. And now I think Lionel has looked and has seen this very large, unfamiliar man. And so Lionel is thinking, is it possible that Dunk might be a serious adversary for me? But I think Lionel is also thinking, what a cutie is the other thing he's thinking. So so there's a bit going on. And yeah, Dunk says that the reason why he slouches is because Dunk grew up on the streets of Flea Bottom, and it was dangerous in the slums of Flea Bottom, so Dunk tends to hide himself, tends to be defensive. But Lionel says the gods made Dunk tall, so Dunk should be tall. Dunk should be proud. Dunk should take up space like Lionel does. He should get a better name than Dunk, which is a ridiculous name. And I think this is like how Olenna Tyrell tells Daenerys in the TV show, be a dragon. I think it's like how Tyrion tells Jon Snow, use your bastard identity like armor. These books are very much about identity and the pride and the power of identity. And so in this episode, Dunk is creating his identity as Sir Duncan the Tall. And I think that the reason why Dunk names himself the Tall is because Lionel just told him, be tall. Just like Egg says, is Dunk short for Duncan? So Dunk literally constructs his identity this episode from the suggestions of Lionel and Egg, which is cute. We create our identity from the people around us and the words that we gather from around us, and I think that's really cool. Lionel and Dunk dance, and it's a very kooky, ridiculous dance. Lionel is having so much fun. And they do this strange dance, Lionel and Dunk, where they're trying to stomp on each other's feet. And it's a bit violent, and it's a bit scary, and it's a bit horny. There's a moment where Dunk looks terrified because he's just stomped on Lionel's foot. And Lionel, as a highborn person from a great house, could destroy Dunk's life if he wanted to. And so there's real fear here, but like Lionel is just having fun. And it reminds me of a line in House of the Dragon where Laenor says that dancing is like combat. And I think that we see that here. This dance is violent. This dance is a bit horny. It's fun. It's like the tournament itself. So after the dancing, Lionel sits and sort of serenades Dunk. I love the body language here. Like, Dunk is looking so impressed and entranced by Lionel rambling about how cool he is. Lionel talks about how he once bravely sailed into a storm, and it was scary, but he did it anyway. Because the Stormlanders are ruled from Storm's End. The Baratheon seat is Storm's End. And the Stormlands are famous for their storms. In fact, Robert Renly and Stannis Baratheon's father, Stefan Baratheon, died in a storm, in a shipwreck. Here's some glorious artwork by Ted Nasmith of Storm's End and the storms. And Lionel says that, well, every Stormlander must face the storm. That's what we got to do. And I like how this episode has a bit about the regional identity of the different kingdoms. Lionel feels that all Stormlanders must face the storm. Plummer talks about how, Reachmen are better than Riverlanders. So there's a sense of like regional identity in Westeros that we don't often get to see in the other shows. These, of course, are the kingdoms of Westeros. Kingdoms is a misnomer, but, you know, there's the North, there's the Iron Islands, Vale, Riverlands, Westermen, Crownlands, Reach, Stormlands, Dawn. Dawn only recently became part of the Seven Kingdoms. King Daeron II was the one who brought Dawn into the Seven Kingdoms. And so when they're talking about the war against the Vulture King in the Red Mountains, that was a conflict with a Dornish outlaw. There's still a bit of tension between Dawn and the other realms, which is something that contributed to the Blackfire Rebellion 13 years ago. So that's a whole thing. Dunk is worried that he might lose his joust and lose everything. And he talks about how he's anxious, and he's anxious about his anxiety, and that makes him more anxious. And Lionel's like, nah, man, it's fine. Like, if you lose, it's still cool, because it's honorable to be defeated by someone powerful. And Dunk's like, yeah, like, true, but I'll be homeless and penniless if I lose my first joust. And to Lionel, that's just funny. Like, Lionel just laughs when Dunk says he can't afford to get his own horses back. And, you know, Dunk talks about how unfair that is. Dunk says that, well, it's easy for you to say that it's all cool and honorable because you're rich and you're powerful, and you can get away with it if you lose your first joust. So again, it's highlighting the inequality and the unfairness of this class system. Dunk sees Manfred Dondarrion leaving the party with two women, Red and Leah the Lovely, and they have some banter about hanging Dornishmen, which is not in the book. And Manfred is a douchebag, and he's arrogant, and he doesn't care about Dunk. And Dunk says that, hey, my master Arlen, like me and Arlen, we served your family. Arlen took a wound in service of House Dondarrion. We fought for you. We bled for you. And Manfred's like, I don't care. Manfred doesn't even remember the people who fought and died for his family. So again, driving the unfairness of this unequal hierarchy home. And so Dunk is screwed. If Sir Manfred doesn't vouch for Dunk, if a knight doesn't vouch for Dunk, then Dunk can't participate in the tournament. So it seems like Dunk is screwed. And I really like how Red, the woman Red, looks back at Dunk with a sympathetic glance, sort of saying, damn, I'm sorry that Manfred is such a douche. It sucks to be you. Little bit of solidarity there as Red goes to do her duty for House Dondarrion. So it sucks that, Manfred does whatever he wants while Dunk has to struggle to even be allowed to participate in this situation. In the book, it's a little bit different. In the book, Dunk tries to persuade Manfred by telling the story of how the Dondarrions got their heraldry. So this is the artwork by Mike S. Miller. And so the legend goes that the Dondarrions were in a war, and there was a Dondarrion messenger who was accosted by some enemy Dornishmen, and just when he was about to be stopped, some lightning struck both of the Dornishmen at once. Forked lightning killed both of the Dornishmen, and that allowed the Dondarrion to bring the message to the Storm King, the Durandon Storm King, and that saved the day and allowed them to win the war. And so for that reason, the Storm King raised the first Dondarrion to nobility, and that's where House Dondarrion started. And again, Dornish are the enemy in that region. Like, there's a long history of Stormlanders fighting against the Dornish along the Dornish marches, and so that's a rivalry that exists to this day. But yeah, that's where the Dondarrions came from. And Dunk is like, oh, well, since I know that story, that shows how I am connected to you guys, the Dondarrions. I learned that story when I was in the Red Mountains, helping the Dondarrions fight the Vulture King. But Manfred is like, yeah, I don't care. Everyone knows that story. So that's a little bit that they cut from the show. Manfred's a douche. Dunk goes back, defeated, to his camp, and to his surprise, he finds Egg. Egg has cooked a little fish, and Dunk is like, how the hell did you get here? And Egg explains that he got from the inn to Ashford by riding in a lamb cart. And Egg smugly says that he's done all of the work, setting up the campfire and washing the clothes and doing all the things and cleaning the armor. And so it's like, well, he's already doing the things, so you might as well just accept him as squire. I think this is low-key a plot hole. Like, how did Egg find Dunk? I think that's a bit of a plot hole in both the book and the show. Like how does Egg know that this tree is Dunk's camp? Like, did Egg just wander around until he happened to see Dunk's shield leaning against a tree? I mean, I think Dunk has his shield, doesn't he? Yeah, Dunk has his shield on his back. So how did Egg know that this random camp at this random tree is Dunk's camp? Did Egg go and ask everyone in Ashford Meadow and say, hey, has someone seen a tall guy camping somewhere? I think it's a small plot hole. I don't think it really makes sense that Egg knew where Dunk's camp was, but whatever. So Egg's like, yeah, look, I did all the work, so why not just accept me as squire? And Egg asks what Dunk's name is, and on the spot, Dunk is like, yeah, it's Sir Duncan the Tall. It looks as though it never occurred to Dunk that Dunk might be short for Duncan. But he creates his identity on the spot. Lionel said be tall. Egg said Duncan. So Dunk says his name is Duncan the Tall. So that's what sort of closes the loop and bookends this whole episode, is the journey that Dunk goes on to create the identity of Sir Duncan the Tall. And Dunk's like, okay, like, fine, you can... Egg, he agrees to take Egg as his squire for the duration of the tournament. He does warn Egg that being the squire to a hedge knight is tough, because Dunk knows what that's like. He was the squire to Sir Arlen for many years. And Dunk says that the food sucks, and they don't have a tent, and things might be hard, and he will beat Egg if Egg deserves it, but Dunk is honest, and he's fair, and he's humble. He says he's not a lord, he's just a hedge knight. And so that humility is a huge contrast to Manfred Dondarrion before. So Manfred Dondarrion was such a hoity-toity slob who doesn't care. Oh, my lord father. Oh, I'm Manfred Dondarrion. But Dunk is much more humble and real and respectful, and so that's really defining him. In all ways, Dunk is a legit knight. He's a true knight. He cares about other people. He wants to do the right thing. He's respectful. He's honorable. Except for the small fact that he might be lying about being a knight, and he wasn't knighted by Arlen. He's a true knight who isn't a knight, just like Brienne. There's a lot of parallels between Dunk in this story and Brienne of Tarth in Game of Thrones. So Dunk and Egg go to camp, and they look up and they see a shooting star. So heavenly lights are important in this world. Lights in the sky can mean good luck, or they can be bad luck. They can be omens of doom, like the red comet that we see in Game of Thrones Season 2. But since all of the rich, fancy noble knights are sleeping under silk tents, the fancy knights won't see this shooting star. The only people who see this shooting star are the people who are sleeping under the stars, like Dunk and Egg. So it's only the humble, poor hedge knight who gets to see the lucky shooting star. So that's a really lovely symbol of how what makes Dunk special is his humility. And it hints at bigger destiny. The shooting star suggests that maybe there is great hope and there's a great future for Dunk and Egg. Although, of course, it also could be interpreted as an ominous sign. Signs and prophecies are often ambiguous in this series, like the White Hart. So, that's the episode. And yeah, overall, this is maybe the most faithful adaptation of a Game of Thrones story. Like this show so far, episode 1, almost every scene in this episode is a scene from the book. They did add Red and Beanie and Daisy. They did add the scenes with Lionel, but all the other scenes are in the book, and a lot of the dialogue is word for word the same as what's in the book. So it's certainly one of the most faithful Game of Thrones shows ever. It's also clearly one of the funniest and most fun shows ever, and it has a very different tone, a lighter tone, and a smaller scale. So yeah, let me know in the comments on the live chat what you think of this show so far. I'm now going to respond. Oh, yeah, I'm going to respond to some of your questions and donations and super chats. If you do want to ask a question, the best way is using the Streamlabs link in the description. And again, I gotta tell you about Dunk Time, because my rotten wormy cousin Alt Swift X and Glidus have beaten me to it, and they've already released a 3-hour conversation about this episode of the Night of the Seven Kingdoms. I try to keep it professional here on Alt Shift X. I try to keep to my citations. I show you my fancy charts. I try not to be too opinionated. But Alt Shift X and Glidus, they get opinionated. Some might say they get a little bit silly even, which I thoroughly disapprove of. But if you want to hear a 3-hour conversation about this episode of the Night of the Seven Kingdoms, you can see it at nebula.tv/AltSwiftX. Signing up at Nebula does help out this channel. It is a good way to support Alt Shift X. So I do appreciate it if you sign up for Nebula. On Nebula, there is also 60 hours of bonus exclusive videos that you can watch. The Fake Jon Snow, which is a 22-hour long video about Jon Snow in Game of Thrones. You can watch that on Nebula. There's also Dragon Time, which is a series of conversations about every episode of House of the Dragon, including House of the Dragon Season 1. So if you want to check that out, sign up on Nebula. I appreciate it. Thank you. Cool. Also, by the way, I'm doing these live streams right after A Night of the Seven Kingdoms airs every week. You can listen to these live streams on podcast apps for free with no ads if you would like. There's a link in the description. It's also on Spotify, but you can listen on like Pocket Casts or Podcast Addict or any of those apps for free with no ads if you would like. And also, if you want to listen to Dunk Time on Nebula, you can listen to that on podcast apps as well by using the Nebula RSS feed. So those are all good ways to listen to this. And of course, I will also be making a Alt Shift X explained video all about this episode, which is going to be out in like a day or two, I think. So that's exciting as well. Okay, all right. How about responding to your questions? And again, I'm going to avoid spoilers for now, and then we're going to enter the spoiler zone. So beware. I'll let you know before we enter the spoiler zone. So, Ukrainian Dynamite, thanks for the donation, says, "Hello, Altschwingus and Glingus, love what you guys do, excited for the videos. Do you think that Dunk's explosive diarrhea was a reference to Daenerys Targaryen's loose brown stools? Did Dunk drink before he shat after he drank?" Yeah, so there is a notorious moment in Game of Thrones Book 5 where Daenerys drinks some river water and eats some funny berries, and then has some explosive diarrhea, and the more she drank, the more she shat. And that's like the last we've seen of Daenerys since 2011. The most recent Game of Thrones main book was in 2011, and Daenerys is still wandering the Dothraki Sea, and Jon Snow is still bleeding out in the snow. So we are still waiting for the next installment. And I hope that George hurries, because Daenerys needs to wipe her bum. Thank you, Nathan Kelly, who says, "We're back." Thank you, Joseph, who says, "Big fan of your work. Loved the Ivanhoe video." Hey, thanks, Joseph. If you want to watch the Ivanhoe video, it's at nebula.tv/AltShiftX. Good way to support the channel. Joseph says, "Was wondering if you're ever interested in looking at George Martin's other inspirations, like Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn." Yeah, so, I mean, something that I've done with Dune is that I dug into Frank Herbert's inspirations when he wrote Dune. Because previously, you know, when I started this channel, I was mostly just focused on the stories. Alt Shift X has always mostly been about just reporting, what do the books say? What are the books about? What are the themes of the book? What are the interesting theories and subplots and conspiracies and complications? What's in the books? Is sort of the primary question that we're asking in most of the Alt Shift X videos, certainly the early ones. But with Dune, I got really interested in the life of the author Frank Herbert and the inspirations behind Dune, which was really fascinating. And we made a video about that, about Frank Herbert, about the author of Dune, which you can watch on Alt Shift X. And so, yeah, I mean, I am also curious about the inspirations behind Game of Thrones. It's funny because we've been making Game of Thrones videos for much longer than we've been making Dune videos. But in some ways, I think I know the life of Frank Herbert and the inspirations behind Dune better than I know the inspirations behind A Song of Ice and Fire. That's definitely an area that I can learn more about. I mean, that said, like, you know, the influences on A Song of Ice and Fire, George has talked about them at length. There's a series called The Accursed Kings by Maurice Giron, which was an enormous inspiration on Ice and Fire. I mean, real history, especially the Wars of the Roses, are one of the main inspirations between Ice and Fire. Like in the War of the Roses, there was House Lancaster versus House York, which is just like House Lannister versus House Stark, right? It's the same stuff. And he said that like the Red Wedding was inspired by the Black Dinner in real history. And yes, there is a series called Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams. And apparently that's also a huge inspiration on Ice and Fire. So it's not something that I've dug into a lot yet, but it's definitely something interesting to look into. Because people who have read Memory and Sorrow and Thorn say that, yeah, like it's so much like Ice and Fire, it's not funny. And also the Accursed Kings as well, and also the Wars of the Roses. So yeah, those are definitely interesting areas to look into more. Thank you, Shannon, who says, will you ever do Sopranos videos? I'm not planning to do Sopranos videos. I think for me, it's most attractive when there's a book series that the show is based on. Like when I'm looking for a series to cover, I'm looking for a show that is good and that I love and that is popular and that I think is like complicated and deep enough to talk about. And ideally one that's based on a series of books, because it's a really good structure for an analysis to go, okay, how does the adaptation compare to the original work? That's a really good structure that gives you a lot to talk about and a lot to dig into. If it's just about, you know, The Sopranos, I mean, people have said, oh, why don't you analyze Mad Men? Why don't you analyze Breaking Bad? And those are all like amazing, deep shows, but it is more difficult, I think, when you don't have the sort of groundwork of the book to refer to. And also those are older shows, and ideally, like if I'm going to put a whole lot of work into a series, I'd rather do something that feels a bit more current. So it's great that Dune is something that's current. You know, the third Dune movie is coming out at the end of this year. So it feels worthwhile to put a lot of work into Dune videos. So yeah, I'm not planning on Sopranos, but hey, anything's possible. Where's Poochie says, the Game of Thrones theme being interrupted by poop reminded me of Mulder pissing on the Independence Day poster in the X-Files film. I haven't seen the X-Files film, but yeah, not the first time someone's used bodily fluids to set the tone. Thank you, TTV Flatbed, who says, I love how the GOT theme gets cut short by diarrhea. Also, drink every time someone gets clouted on the ear. Yeah, it's definitely a ongoing... it's an ongoing joke, Dunk threatening to clout Egg in the ear, but never actually clouting Egg in the ear. It was surprising seeing that montage of Arlen hitting Dunk so many times, which is not something that quite happens in the books. Sting says, what are the odds that we see a Dane at some point in this series? Well, no spoilers, but if we refer to our Targaryen family tree, we are going to meet some Targaryens in this series, and we're going to meet Prince Baelor, we're going to meet Prince Maekar, we're going to meet Prince Aerion, and the mother of Prince Aerion is a Dane, Diana Dane, and Diana is the wife of Prince Maekar. So there is a Dane hanging out, or there was a Dane. I think Diana Dane might actually be dead at this point. But the Danes are married into the Targaryen family right now. So it's not unimaginable that we could see a Dane. Thank you for the donation from Soranot, who says Sir Arlen of the Poop Tree. Thank you, Where's Poochie, who says, is Bloodraven the Robin? So one of the fun preoccupations of Game of Thrones theorists is saying that everything is caused by Bloodraven. So Bloodraven is the weird tree dude who teaches Bran magic in Game of Thrones Season 6. And Bloodraven is like low-key the most interesting character in this series. We've made an Alt-Shift-X video all about Bloodraven. And we got a glimpse of Bloodraven in a vision in House of the Dragon Season 2. This is him here in the family tree. So the current generation of Targaryens who we're going to meet in this season, Prince Baelor and Prince Maekar, they are nephews or half-nephews of Bloodraven. So Bloodraven is around, you know? So, like, all those theories that we like to do about Bloodraven, you know, mind-controlling every other character, about Bloodraven seeing through the eyes of animals, that is something that Bloodraven does in the books, and Bloodraven is actually alive and active at this time in the story. Bloodraven doesn't appear in the book, not in the first Dunk and Egg book, so, you know, I'm not expecting to see Bloodraven this season, but it's not impossible. And any of those crackpot theories about Bloodraven are, you know, a bit less crackpot at the moment. Thank you, Glukon, and thank you, Jess K, who says, really love that the very next character Dunk meets after burying Arlen is Egg. Kind of demonstrates that Dunk is moving from one stage of his life, as a student and mentee, to the next, as a teacher and mentor. Yeah, I agree very much. I think it's really lovely how Dunk says that Arlen taught him as best he could. And then Egg says to Dunk, you can teach me as best you can. So it really highlights that Dunk is becoming Egg's teacher in exactly the same way that Arlen was Dunk's teacher. It's that idea of paying forwards the kindness. And it's what life is that we start as children and we're nurtured by others, and then as we get older, we get to be the one who nurtures others. We go from a student to a teacher, and that's really beautiful. And I think that all of the imagery of the first opening scene that's about the tree and the grave and the light and the dark evokes all of those beautiful contrasts. It's important that it's a spring rain in the books. I mean, remember, seasons are inconsistent in this world. Sometimes a summer can last for years. Sometimes a winter can last for years. At the moment, it's spring, so it's a time of hope. It's a time of good vibes. But despite that we're in spring, we're in the optimistic time, it's raining. It's a spring rain, and there's death, the death of Arlen, amidst this time of hope. So even the seasons, the spring rain, also evokes this idea of contrast between life and death. Disco says, hey, re-shifting on the old man's grave, do you feel a kinship with Dunk because you too express your innermost thoughts to Glidus, who is in fact a horse? Yeah, well, you know, it's Alt-Shift-X who has done these lengthy live streams and conversations with Glidus, and I can confirm that Glidus is a horse. Glidus is a horse whenever he is recording a video, and you can hear all of that on nebula.tv/Alt-Shift-X. Thank you, Jay, who says, 7 years ago, I sent a super chat that Jason loves Annie. Now we are married. Congratulations, Jason and Annie. That's beautiful. It's so nice when people come back and back again in the live chat and I recognize names. And yeah, I mean, look, we've been doing this long enough that people have had some like whole ass life events in the time that we've been discussing these stories. So congratulations to you guys. Jess says, wait a minute. The innkeeper mentioned the price of eggs, and Egg's name is Egg. That suggests eggs. See, of course, the reason why Egg is named Egg is that his head is bald like an egg. And Dunk threatens to beat Egg because an egg beater is how you make cake. And Dunk is thick like cake, like an oak, and he's under an elm. Yeah, we're just free associating. Thank you, Soronot. Thank you, Jess K, who says, I wonder why Arlen never intended to knight Dunk. What was Arlen's plan for Dunk? Yeah, so that is a mystery at the moment, is did Arlen knight Dunk, or is Dunk lying? And if Arlen didn't knight Dunk, why didn't Arlen knight Dunk? And yeah, that's an interesting question to think about as we go forwards. I mean, I think one possible answer to that question is that, as Dunk said, the life of a hedge knight and the life of a squire to a hedge knight is hard. You got to sleep outdoors. You got to be wounded. You got to be poor. You got to struggle, and to some extent, you got to suffer. And so I think those are all good reasons to maybe not make a child into a knight, you know? And we see Arlen having a crossbow bolt yanked out of his body, and we see Arlen dying on a hill, and it's like, well, maybe Arlen didn't want to condemn Dunk to a similar life. But we shall see. Jess says that Dunk and the sex workers had a moment not unlike on the ones Ralph Fiennes and Anya Taylor-Joy do on The Menu. Two service workers recognizing one another and showing mutual sympathy and respect. Yeah, a little bit of solidarity among people in similar roles. I enjoyed The Menu. That's a fun movie. And Anya Taylor-Joy plays Paul Atreides' sister in the Villeneuve Dune movies, which is a whole subject unto itself. Where's Poochie? Thanks for the donation. Says that Raymond looks like Jay from Red Letter Media. Does he? I feel like Jay from Red Letter Media has much better hair. I think that looks like Jay from Red Letter Media before he had his glamification, his yassification. I don't know how Jay did it, but he just gets more handsome every year. Maybe Raymond will look as handsome as Jay Bauman one day. Thank you, Winifree iPhone, who says thanks for all that you do. Thank you, Winifree iPhone. Thank you, Hairless Oyster, who says long time ago, before the wind, before the snow. It's been years. I've been listening and commenting and loving your content. Thanks. Thank you so much, Hairless Oyster. Hairless Oyster has been a part of Alt-Shift-X streams and Alt-Swift-X streams for many years, and I appreciate you, mate. Thank you, Mason, who says, so excited for you to talk me to sleep every Sunday night. Thank you, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, who says, first stream I've caught since my son was born, and no more nightmares of him yelling, Balandra. Quite liked the episode, and I think it channeled the spirit of the story well. I liked how it showed that being a knight is expensive. Yeah, that's one of the things that we don't normally see in fantasy stories, and even in Game of Thrones, is that everything's economics, as it turns out. Being a knight is not just about running around waving a sword. It means cleaning your chainmail and finding a place for your horse to eat hay and dealing with the campfire and getting paid and trying to get a better payment. And so I think that's a really sort of on-the-ground meat and potatoes practical set of considerations that we don't normally see in these kinds of stories. So I think that this is unique, and I think that this show in particular is taking a more small-scale approach to all this stuff. Thank you, N. Ronan, who says, Pluribus is 100% worth analysis. Yeah, Pluribus is a new show on Apple. It's by Vince Gilligan, the creator of Breaking Bad. It is sci-fi, and it's drama, and it's beautiful. I think that the pacing of season 1 slows right the hell down, which is a little frustrating, but I think that it's very beautiful and it's a very good character study. So if you're interested in some slow-paced sci-fi, Pluribus is worth checking out. There's a channel called Quinn's Ideas that has done some Pluribus live streams, so maybe pay Quinn's Ideas a visit. Shout out to Quinn. Thank you, TK, who says, I want to say I appreciate your videos. Thank you, TK. And Meow says, love how they are portraying Lionel. He's such a romantic, insane, bisexual heartthrob. Absolutely have to recommend the Witcher series for anyone who loves Ice and Fire and Arthurian legends. So glad we're back for more weekly Ice and Fire. Yeah, Lionel is enormously fun. I think the actor Daniel Ings steals the show in every scene, and George Martin loves it too. Salt says, plot horses, dude. Plot horses indeed. Okay, is it time to move into the spoiler zone? We're about 2 hours in. I think it might be time to move into the spoiler zone. So, buckle on your spoiler helmet, gird your loins. Spoiler warning. Spoiler warning. Spoiler warning. We're going to spoil future episodes, potentially, of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. We are going to spoil Game of Thrones, potentially. We're going to spoil House of the Dragon, potentially. We're going to talk spoilers. Okay, you have been warned. Do you want to hear the spoilers? Do you want to hear the spoilers? I think you want to hear the spoilers. So, do you want to hear the spoilers? What are we saying in the live chat? All right. Spoil. All right. We're gurming our loins. Okay, let's do it. Before you leave, I do need to remind you once more, actually, about A Night of the Seven, about Dunk Time. I can't emphasize enough that AltShiftX and Glidus did a 3-hour episode about this episode of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, and it would be a great help if you would subscribe on Nebula. Do you want to hear the full pitch? I think you want to hear the full pitch. Look, here's the thing. Glidus and AltShiftX have talked about this episode for 3 hours because there's a lot to analyze. There's implications for the future of the season, of the series. There's implications for the lore of the books. There's opinions to be had. And Glidus and AltShiftX get into it in, some might say, excessive detail in Dunk Time. You can listen to Dunk Time right after A Night of the Seven Kingdoms airs, every Sunday night on Nebula. Nebula.tv/AltShiftX. So Nebula has the full-length version of Dunk Time. There will also be a free public version of Dunk Time on Glidus's channel. Go subscribe to Glidus. But for the full-length version, right after the episode airs, you got to go to Nebula. Nebula also has the full-length Dragon Time videos about every episode of House of the Dragon. Nebula also has the fake Jon Snow, the 22-hour-long video about Jon Snow, and you can listen to that on podcast apps using the Nebula podcast feed. Nebula has the AltShiftX video about Ivanhoe, the movie that inspired Dunk and Egg. There are, in total, over 60 hours of exclusive AltShiftX and Glidus videos on Nebula. Nebula is an independent, creator-owned site. It's not as much of a nightmare as YouTube is, and it's a good place, and it's a good place to support creators. You can get 50% off an annual subscription in January. That's ending at the end of January. 50% off an annual subscription with my link in the description. So if you're a true knight, sign up at nebula.tv/AltShiftX. Or if you're a rotten, wormy apple, sign up at nebula.tv/AltShiftX. I mean, or if you're a Blackfire pretender, go and sign up at nebula.tv/Glidus. Pick your poison, choose your side. Greens versus the blacks. Yeah, man. Look, I'm just excited for Dunk Time. I'm into Dunk Time. It's a good show. Go check out Dunk Time. All right. Ad over. Let's go into the spoiler zone. All right, for reals, we're in the spoiler zone now. Was that enough preamble? My goodness. Okay, I'm about to display the spoilery family chart. Are you ready for the spoilery family chart? If you don't want to see spoilers, close your eyes. So here's the thing. Egg is not just a random stable boy. Egg is in fact a Targaryen prince. Spoiler, Egg is the son of Prince Maekar. Egg is the grandson of King Daeron Targaryen II. And the drunk guy at the inn, that is Prince Daeron Targaryen, nicknamed the Drunken because he's an alcoholic. Maester Aemon talked about his brother Egg in Game of Thrones because Maester Aemon is Egg's brother. And so Egg is like the great-grandfather of Daenerys Targaryen, the great-grandfather of Jon Snow. The Game of Thrones TV show removes a generation in the Targaryen family tree, so it's slightly different, but don't worry about it. So the reason why Daeron the Drunken and Egg were at that inn is because Daeron was meant to compete in the tournament at Ashford, but he didn't want to, and so he ran away and he took Egg to this inn and he shaved Egg's hair off to hide his Targaryen blonde hair, and he's just trying to hunker down because he doesn't want to participate in the tournament. And to Egg, that's a great disappointment. He wanted to be at the tournament, and that's why Egg decides to hang out with Dunk. And the books describe the whole life story of Dunk and Egg in brief. We know that many years in the future, Egg, spoiler, Egg becomes the king of Westeros. And Duncan the Tall, leads King Egg's Kingsguard. In Game of Thrones Season 4, Joffrey talks about Duncan in the White Book of the Kingsguard. We know a little bit about some of Dunk and Egg's adventures. They fight in some of the Blackfire rebellions. Dunk fights a trial by combat against Lionel Baratheon many years from now and wins. The books never tell us whether Dunk was really knighted or not, but it is implied repeatedly that Dunk is lying, that he's not a real knight. Spoiler, the ending for Dunk and Egg is at Summerhall. There was a mysterious tragedy at Summerhall. There was a big fire, and this fire seems to have killed Dunk and killed Egg and killed half the Targaryen family. And it seems as though Dunk may have heroically saved the Targaryen princess, Rhaella. I can never bloody remember her name. Let me have a look. Here's the full family tree. Rhaella Targaryen seems to have been saved by Dunk as she was giving birth to Rhaegar Targaryen, who is the brother of Daenerys and who later has Jon Snow. So, in a funny way, Dunk maybe, like, saves the world by saving Rhaella and Jon Snow and Daenerys. But also, Egg maybe screwed everything up by causing the fire at Summerhall, or maybe that was for good reason. So George Martin has currently made 3 Dunk and Egg books, and George Martin says that he plans to write 12 more Dunk and Egg books to tell the rest of their life story. Some people suspect that George won't get around to finishing all 12 more Dunk and Egg books, and so the showrunner of this TV show, Ira Parker, has said that, well, maybe after we adapt the first 3 Dunk and Egg books in the first 3 seasons of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, maybe we will then, in future seasons, do the future adventures of Dunk and Egg based on George Martin's plans. At least the next 2 Dunk and Egg books, which are said to be... The working titles of the next 2 books are The She-Wolves of Winterfell and The Village Hero, set in the North and the Riverlands. George Martin said he was recently working on those and writing those in the past year. So maybe Season 4 and Season 5 of this TV show will adapt those unpublished books, or will, be based on the notes and the plans for those unfinished books, and maybe it could continue. Maybe it'll go into A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, Season 12, Summerhall. I think that could be incredible. I mean, it might suck, but I think it could be incredible. I hope it happens, and I hope it's great. But yeah, this is how it all connects anyway. House of the Dragon, Night of the Seven Kingdoms, Game of Thrones. That was Spoiler Zone. Is that enough spoilers? I think that's probably enough spoilers for now. Is it time to exit Spoiler Zone, or do you guys have some spoilery questions? If you have some spoilery questions, now is the time. Poochie says, Egg found Dunk via horses. So Poochie is saying that Bloodraven, the three-eyed crow, used skin-changing magic to warg into the lambs in the lamb cart, and then the warged lambs guided Egg to Dunk's elm tree, and that's how they found each other. Or maybe Bloodraven warged Sweetfoot to get Egg and Dunk together. That could be it. Thank you, Noble Child, who says, Long Flight Guy checking in. Still passing my time with you and Gladys's videos. Keep doing what you're doing. Thank you, Noble Child. All right, are we going to exit the spoiler zone, or do you guys have any other spoilery questions? Glidus in the live chat, welcome, says 3,000 people watching, but only 700 likes. That is outrageous, isn't it, Glidus? Everyone press like, everyone press subscribe, and everyone go and subscribe to Glidus. The public shortened version of Dunk Time will be on Glidus's channel, and Glidus is making more videos as well, so go do subscribe to Glidus. And a great way to support Alt-Shift-X and to support Glidus is subscribing on Nebula. And you can do that at nebula.tv/Glidus or nebula.tv/Alt-Shift-X. Maxigun says, is it good? I think A Night of the Seven Kingdoms is great. I think it's one of the best seasons of Westeros TV that we've ever seen, personally. But if you want to hear more opinions, then go listen to Dunk Time on Nebula. Jess says, finally, a Daeron on screen. Yeah, well, it's funny. In House of the Dragon, we're still waiting to see Alicent's son, Daeron. We finally have all of Maekar's boys on screen. Yeah, well, we will do. So that is exciting. These are characters that we've been reading about and theorizing about for decades. Like, The Hedge Knight came out in 1998, And here we are finally seeing them on screen. So this is an exciting time. And it is a faithful, good adaptation, goddammit. So this is a good time. But there's also House of the Dragon Season 3 coming out this year. So this is the first time we've ever had 2 different Game of Thrones shows coming out this year. Now, there is a bit of an ominous cloud hovering over House of the Dragon Season 3. Because there was a recent interview with George R. R. Martin where he said that his relationship with the House of the Dragon showrunner Ryan Condal is, quote, abysmal. And he said in a meeting, reportedly, that Ryan Condal's plans, he doesn't like them, and that, quote, this is no longer my story, reportedly. So there's a bit of a dark cloud hanging over House of the Dragon. But I mean, I truly do think that House of the Dragon Season 2 was mostly good, apart from the giant structural issues caused by the change from 10 to 8 episodes. I think that kind of screwed them. So, I still have hope that House of the Dragon might be able to do a good job. Although, if they only have 8-episode seasons, I think that 16 episodes is not long enough to include the rest of the Dance of the Dragons properly. So they're really going to have to cut some stuff and streamline some stuff. So, yeah, look, I don't know. I hope it all works out. Okay, should we leave the spoiler zone? Should we end the stream? Is there anything more to say? I think that it might be time to end this stream. We've been talking for 2 hours about a 40-minute long episode of TV. I want to say thank you for listening. I really appreciate everybody listening. I appreciate the patrons on Patreon. Shout out to Foreign Man in a Foreign Land. YouTuber Foreign Man in a Foreign Land lent me his HBO login, which really helped me out recently. I wish I was joking, but I did get some help to log into HBO, so shout out to Foreign Man in a Foreign Land. The Alt Shift X video, Season 1, Episode 1 Explained, will be out in like a day or two. You can listen to these live streams that we're doing every week on podcast apps if you'd like. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe to Glidus. Consider signing up on Nebula. It's a great way to support this channel, and you get 60 hours of exclusive content. I think people are thinking that I'm misspeaking. I'm not stuttering. There's 60 hours of bonus Alt Shift X and Glidus videos on Nebula. That's a true number. I dare you to go and count. There's 60 hours of extra Alt Shift X and Glidus videos on Nebula. Can you believe that? But yeah, look, I think we're going to end it here. I really enjoyed talking about this episode, and I hope you enjoyed listening. And I hope that you'll come back next week when we talk about the next episode. This has been a delight, and we'll see you all next time. Glidus, is there anything else I should be saying? All right. Thank you, everyone in the live chat, and see you all next time. Check out Dunk Time on Nebula. It's really fun.